In this video, I want to show you how you can create smart objects from within Lightroom, from within Adobe Camera Raw, and actually directly from within Photoshop. So the first thing I'm going to show you is using Lightroom to open up an image and editing it in Photoshop as a smart object. So in Lightroom, under the photo setting, we want to say edit in. If you use Lightroom and you've been using it to edit photos in Photoshop, you've probably just used this setting here, edit in Photoshop. What we want to do is open as smart object in Photoshop. And as kind of the description on the website on Blackboard kind of showed, was that smart objects retain all the file information that the original file contained, but it allows you to kind of treat it as a layer within Photoshop. So we'll see how that works here in a second. So what I did was I said photo, edit in, open as smart object in Photoshop. Okay, and it should have done something, so I'm going to switch over to Photoshop here. May have done it twice because it's a little on the sluggish side. But we will get there eventually. We're here. Okay, so it did open two. I'm going to close one. We don't need both. Don't save that one because we have a duplicate. Okay, cool. So here we have the same image from Lightroom, but now it's in Photoshop and it's a smart object. And it's going to be very difficult to see probably on the screen. You may have to play this video full screen. But there's a little icon in the lower right-hand corner here, and that denotes that that layer is a smart object. Now, you can't edit directly on a smart object, so if you wanted to paint on it, you can't. If you wanted to use one of the, healing brush or clone stamp, you can't directly do it on it because it's kind of a self-contained file. The benefit of doing layers of smart objects is that you can go back in and re-edit that original file, as we'll see here in a second. We can also apply smart filters. So anytime you apply a filter to a regular layer, a non-smart layer, you have to go back in and either undo that setting, duplicate that layer again to apply a different setting, and it's a little bit more destructive. And so keeping with our non-destructive edit workflow, we're going to use these smart objects in a non-destructive way, applying smart filters to them, and then being able to edit the original file again. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to save this file. So I'm going to just say File, Save. And what it'll do, if you didn't move the, or save the file somewhere else, it'll actually kind of save it back to Lightroom as a Photoshop document in the same location as the original file. It's super handy. If you're not using Lightroom, no problem. I'll show you how to use smart objects here in a second. So actually, let me do that first. I'm going to show you other ways to create smart objects. So I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to open up an image here. I'm just going to double click it. It should know to open up in Photoshop. Now notice the interface is slightly different because now we're in Adobe Camera Raw. We aren't in Lightroom. We aren't directly in Photoshop. I'm going to resize my screen here. Get off there. All right, we need to get this so you can actually see everything. Perfect. Okay, cool. So now this image, similar items here, but this is Adobe Camera Raw. Now what I want to do to open this up, and this, I'm going to pretend like I actually made all these changes already, and I'm going to click on here. Notice this little link icon at the bottom. This is where you'd set your workflow options, and so Adobe RGB, 8 bits per channel is fine. Open in Photoshop as smart objects. Click OK. That's all you have to do right now. So you go through and you make your edits. If I click on auto, it'll do its thing here. Maybe it's too light, too dark, whatever. So I'm going to actually lighten it up a little bit. And then I'm going to say open object. Before I check that down here, it just would say open. And so open object, click that. Now the image will open up as a layer in Photoshop. Again, the little icon in the lower right-hand corner, if you pause over it, Smart Object Thumbnail, which is perfect what we need. Okay, so going from Lightroom and opening it up as a Smart Object from Lightroom, or in Camera Raw, Adobe Camera Raw, using the settings at the bottom and choosing Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. Okay, and so there is one other way, which is, let me go back to Photoshop, or my desktop here, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up with Photoshop. So really what I'm doing right here is the third way to create that smart object is from a layer in Photoshop. And all I did was just open that image up in Photoshop. Under Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, which will make it a smart object. Click that. Now my background layer becomes layer 0, and again it's got that smart object icon next to it where we can go back in and apply smart filters to this. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll just use the first example here, my little kitty cat, and we'll apply some smart filters to it, and I'll show you why that's super duper handy. So under the filter menu we have multiple options here. Okay, now some of these may be grayed out, and the reason why they would be grayed out is because opening up a RAW file typically is in 16-bit. With our other image from Adobe Camera Raw in our workflow settings, we chose 8-bit Adobe RGB. But from Lightroom here, it opened up in 16. That's what this number is here, RGB, color space, and 16 bits per channel. This one's RGB, 8 bits per channel, as is this one here. So just to change that, in case that happens to you and some of these options like filter gallery and vanishing point and whatnot are not available, we want to go ahead and go under Image, Mode, and change it to 8 bits per channel. Click that. Visibly you shouldn't see any difference. So all it's doing is lowering the amount of information per channel, per red, green, and blue channels. But it allows us to now access the filter gallery and maybe a couple other options down here. Okay, so all of these now will become smart filters. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm going to go under filter gallery because we're going to be using filter gallery for your assignment. I'm just going to show you how this filter gallery works. So here you have a lot of different choices. You can mix and match. You can fine-tune each of these filters, if you will. And so let me skinny this up a little bit. Bring that up so we can see it. All right, cool. So now this is zoomed in at 100%. On the lower left-hand corner, you can zoom out just to see the whole image. But I would recommend zooming in at 100% just so you can see how the texture is coming along. Here I have rough pastel and glass. Now these little eyeballs, just like layers, you can click it on and off. If I turn rough pastel off, you can start to see, it kind of goes away. If I turn this off, you see nothing. You'll see no filter effect. And so here, if I turn on this and I turn on this, now if I select this one, whatever other one I choose, now it says glass, but if I click on ocean ripple, and now the glass goes away and assumes that whatever I clicked on, and each filter has its own variables here that you can kind of play with. Ocean ripple, paint daubs, so on. How about plastic wrap? Because everybody needs to wrap their cat in plastic. Okay, that's a little odd, isn't it? I'm going to turn on Rep Pastel just to see what it does. Oh yeah, there you go. That looks realistic. But sometimes you just need it. So these are the filters you can play with. I'm just going to leave this one on. I don't need the plastic wrap. I'm just going to leave Rough Pastel on. If I turn the visibility off, it'll only use what's visible. In the filter gallery, I'm just going to click OK. I don't have to wait for it to redraw. Now notice on my layers palette here, I have smart filters and I have filter gallery. Again, if I zoom in here, you can see the filter effect. Now the nice thing is they automatically come with a layer mask or a filter mask. And so here, if I clicked on the mask here, and I took black paint, and I painted with black paint, effectively I'm removing or hiding that filter effect. Now, that mask applies to all the filters you apply to it. So if you have multiple filters stacked on it, so I'm going to undo that, and I'll show you what that looks like. So under the filter gallery again, we can go to Liquify. I'm sorry, under the filter menu, Liquify. This one's kind of fun. Okay. It's gonna, oh, here's the reason why it's showing up white, is because I'm on the mask here. So you need to click on the layer to make sure you're actually activating the right thing. And again, go Liquify. Okay, now I can see the cat. If you don't see anything, that's because you're in the wrong spot. Again, let me skinny this up a little bit. Bring that up so you can see it. Okay, so the fun thing about Liquify is you can push and pull. And so again, you have to be careful. You don't want to push or pull too far, but if you want to, distort things a little bit, skinny things up, you can do that. And that's this first brush here. This is the Reconstruct, which means if I click that, it'll actually basically use a brush to undo that last thing I just did, or any of the adjustments I did. Smooth tool. So you can actually go in and play with these and get some really funky results. So let's go ahead and go overboard here. This is the bloat tool, and we'll use the pucker tool because they're super handy. You never know when you need this effect. Now, the cool thing about this Liquify is, other than it making some crazy looking cat, is it's non-destructive, which means I can go back in and re-edit this. Now I've gone to the pucker tool, and I'm gonna, make her face a little smaller, and we'll shift that down a little bit. If you do it in small increments, you'll get, you want to avoid the smearing of it, so it's not getting all smudgy and stuff. Real-time ears. So you can see, you can kind of, oh boy, she looks bad. But you get the idea. So again, play with these different settings here so you can actually see how this works. But I wanted to just illustrate the fact that this is a non-destructive way to edit. By clicking on OK, I'm going to commit to those changes. And now my poor little kitty has a bulging eyeball. And again, notice in my smart filters here, I have Liquify and I have Filter Gallery. Each one, again, comes with a little eyeball. So if I want to turn the Filter Gallery off, click on the little eye next to Filter Gallery, and that texture effect will go away. Or click on Liquify, just because we were having fun with it, at her expense. It's going to take a second. Again, if you have a big file, it might take a second or two to re-render. So I uncheck Liquify, and that effect goes away, which is cool. Now, again, we want to make sure we save our file. So we already saved it once as a Photoshop document. I don't know why my mouse is acting up. Do a file, save. Okay, that was me cleaning off my mouse. And so now we have a stylized looking image, and it's non-destructive, edited, as well as one extra little bonus you have with opening up a RAW file within Photoshop as a smart object. By double clicking on the smart object layer here, or on the actually thumbnail, this thumbnail, double click, it'll open up as a RAW file. Now the catch is, or the caveat is, it does not go back to Lightroom, and it's just local to that layer. So in other words, you won't see that original RAW file updated with any changes you make here. It's just on that smart object layer that you're able to go in and make these raw adjustments, or these raw filter adjustments. So if I wanted to, click on auto, see what happens. Maybe, nope, that's too much. Increase the exposure a little bit, bring down the whites, maybe play with the clarity, pop that up. Dehaze, exposure, highlights, whites. Okay, and then vibrance, maybe we're gonna take that back a notch. Too much. Cool. You know, and you can play with that. When I click OK, it'll update that smart object, and that smart object only, not the original raw file. Okay, now we're just waiting to re-render the smart filter. So here, all I did, and if we look at my history here, I went in and I edited this smart object, you know, and then turned the filter gallery stuff on, the Liquify on and off. But basically, it allowed me to go in and re-edit that raw file, or the image as a raw file, and give me the same controls as the original raw file, which is a bonus. Now that will apply to this image here, which was originally a raw file, and we just opened it up from Photoshop. I'm sorry, we opened it up from Adobe Camera Raw into Photoshop, and again, it maintains all that raw file information. You know, if you want to open it up a bit like this, we can click OK, and bam, you've got yourself an adjusted raw file. This one, because it's not originally a raw file, I just opened up a JPEG, you know, from my computer. If I double click it, all it really does is it goes to the original JPEG and it creates a temporary file. Notice here it says PSB. Okay, and that PSB just means it's a temporary Photoshop document. So let's say I wanted to add a new layer to this. I want to colorize it. I'm going to hit solid color layer. I'm going to go ahead and pick this, click OK. Now I have two layers in here. Set that to color. Now I've just changed the color within this temporary file. Again, that temporary file is a smart object. If I just click Save, you don't want to save as, you just click Save, and I can close that temporary file. Click that. Notice I'm back in my original file here, the smart object. Both layers are combined into the one smart object. So you can actually edit inside a smart object, make some changes to it, save it, close the temporary file, and now back in Photoshop, you can see the effects of those edits. If I double click it here, again, since I closed the I closed the temporary smart object file, if I double click this again, those layers are intact. So if I wanted to, again, create some kind of other effect, actually I'm going to go here and go, I think that's not black and white. Where's my invert? I want to go invert. Okay, well I can't see it. So I'm going to go here, and we're going to say invert. Again, it's a new layer. Again, file, save. It's a PSB file, so I'm going to close it because I don't need it. When I go back to Photoshop, see this is just that one layer. It's now part of the original document. So here I'm going to click on File, just save. Since it's a JPEG, I can't save it as layers, so it'll tell me save it as a Photoshop file. Click Save, and you're done. So again, just to recap, we opened up this image in Photoshop as a smart object. Okay, so that was the first thing we did in Lightroom. Then we went to this image here, or one of these images. I'm not sure if that, yep, that's it. And we opened that up in Adobe Camera Raw and opened it as a smart object in Photoshop. And then we took this other image, this rain image here, and all it was, it started out was a JPEG. We opened that up in Photoshop and converted that layer that it came in on as a smart object. And then we're able to apply, you know, smart filters to it. We can also edit that as either Adobe Camera Raw, if it was a raw file, or add layers to it because it's now basically a Photoshop document. So hopefully that was helpful. And in the next video, we'll see how you're going to put all these pieces together to create your next assignment, which is labeled analog to digital to analog. We want to simulate a watercolor or hand-done effect using digital tools. Let me know if you have any questions.